this evening on the GST Council meet, the 45th GST Council meet, and the first one to take place in person after the pandemic has begun in 18 or 20 months. A lot of decisions were taken. Inverted duty structures were corrected. On the other hand, the compensation cess timeline, which ends in July of 2022, has effectively been extended till the year 2026 to make up for the losses that were suffered during the pandemic, and a lot of other important tweaks as well. But the key decision that was not taken was petroleum and diesel being included under the ambit of the GST. My colleague Ruchi Bhatia joins us now live from Lucknow, where she is this evening covering the GST Council meet. Ruchi, what were you able to glean about petrol and diesel being included under GST? Was there a serious discussion at all, or was it just on the agenda because the Kerala High Court asked for it to be, and everyone pretty much agreed that they didn't want to tackle it right now?
Well, the issue, Tamanna, of petrol and diesel under the ambit of GST did come up in the council only and only because the Kerala High Court had asked the GST Council to look into this issue. The government was supposed to reply to the Kerala High Court order as well. And well, yes, this issue was discussed. Various states put their foot down, making it very clear that right now is not the time to include petrol and diesel under the ambit of GST. GST, in fact, ever since it has come into being, since 2017, has not lived up to its promise of revenue buoyancy for states. Then how do you expect states and centre both to, come on a middle ground and get something like petrol and diesel under the ambit of GST? And which was one of the reasons that the council decided that now is not the time. Maybe at a future date when things stabilize, we will look at how it has to be done. Whether we have to include, maybe begin with ATF, maybe begin with some of the other products under GST. But this call was not taken. The council today only, the various states, in fact, made it very clear that now is not the time. Maybe at a later date, this issue will be taken up. But so far, the council only spoke to each other. All the states decided that Kerala High Court should be apprised that this matter was taken up in the meeting, was discussed, and all the state members have vehemently opposed bringing petrol and diesel under the ambit of GST.
An item in which a lot of media speculation has been happening in the last few days is about whether petroleum products will be placed under GST. I would like to make it absolutely clear that this item came on the agenda for today's discussion on petroleum products purely because a High Court of Kerala's order, which were some person approaching the High Court of Kerala asking for if it can be included, the court had suggested that the matter be placed before the GST Council. So on the direction of the court, today it was brought on to the table for discussion. Members spoke very clearly that they wouldn't want it to be included in the GST.
All right, M.S Mani, partner Deloitte India, with us on the show, as is Pratik Jain, R.S. Sharma, former CMD ONGC, joining us as well. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us today. Let me start with you, Mr. Sharma. Since we have focused on what was not included or what was put by the side, the petrol and diesel decision under the ambit of GST, are you surprised at all? Was this widely expected? And the real question, will there ever be a situation where FMs of states as well as the central government's finance minister will say, okay, let's bring down the taxes on petrol and diesel to 28% at the highest level, because even that would be pretty much half of what is being paid right now?
You have said it already, Tamanna, what I wanted to say, because today the center as well as states, they are hopelessly dependent on revenue from taxes on petroleum products, taxes and levies. Center collects 21% of its entire tax collection through the taxes on petroleum products. And at this time, when center is trying to keep the fiscal deficit to the minimum, trying to contain the inflation, trying to meet the funds requirements for various welfare measures, vaccinations, health management issues. No way, absolutely no way that center would be willing to, forego part of their revenue in the form of bringing these products into GST and bringing down the taxes to the level of 28%. Likewise, states also, all the states, one by one, they have already categorically stated they will not be agreeable to that petroleum products to be brought under the GST. So I only feel concern coming from the industry that your industry, they are not able to get the input credit. They pay GST for all their input cost, but it's not send-wettable. They are not able to adjust it. That's a big, heavy burden on the industry, and it's not fair, it's not equitable. But so far as this agenda for today's meeting, I was yesterday on another channel and I had to tell the anchor, don't build expectations of your viewers. It will get discussed because Kerala High Court has said, but I can tell you right away, there will be no decision, absolutely no decision feasible on this. That precisely has happened today. So, when it will happen again?
No, but you're right. You're right. Yes. I'll come back to you on that, sir. And you're right that it is not surprising that they don't want to give up these taxes. My question is, will this then continue for the foreseeable future? There is no push or no pressure or no incentive for them to give up this low-hanging fruit. And should it be as simple as that they're not going to do it? So, let's forget about it. Mr. Mani, how do you look at the situation?
Okay, so Tamanna, the way I look at it is, I think for the last few days, all of us were unduly optimistic, and today we are turning unduly pessimistic. So I would just like to bring a few fact points, before you. When GST happened, very few people expected that states would give up their rights to tax a very large number of products, which they had been taxing for 60, 70 years. And I think credit goes to all the states and the center for the way in which the whole agreement was reached, that finally we saw GST at the end of the day. And in 2017, all states surrendered a large part of their taxing powers to the center. Equally, the center gave them the right to tax services. So we have had a good experiment there. Now, we are into 4 years of GST. It is very clear to me that inclusion of petroleum products in GST is a question of time. Now, since it is a question of time, to me, the most relevant question would be, is this the appropriate time to do it? Possibly the answer which comes to my mind is, it may not be the best of times to even attempt doing this now for two reasons. One is the fact that states have also been suffering a dent on their collections all across. Their collections, not only on petroleum products, but everything else that they collect. Stamp duty collections have gone down in many states. The VAT that they collect on alcoholic beverages had gone down significantly during last year of pandemic. So states are suffering from a revenue collection hit on one side, and the state's healthcare costs have shot up like anything. So when they try to do that bridging at that point of time, if we tell them that, look, here is a product that you have been eligible to tax for the last 4 years after GST is introduced, let's go ahead and decide that we are going to stop doing this. So in terms of timing, possibly this is not an opportune moment. But the way I look at it is, it's just a question of time, possibly 6 months from now. Because the way markets are behaving, the way the GDP is growing, if you look at all the macroeconomic indicators, the way they are progressing for the country, 6 months down the line, there'll be much more optimism and all that. At that point of time, if somebody approaches the states, not because a high court directed them to approach the GST Council, But on their own, possibly we'll start seeing the first stages of having maybe an ATF coming in first, together with natural gas or followed by natural gas, and a progression to petrol, diesel in course of time. So to me, it's a question of time. And if we have waited for 4 years, let's be patient for a couple of more years, possibly to do that. But someday or the other, it's got to happen.
No, but someday, everyone hopes that things will improve at some day or the other. But let me take this to Pratik Jain. This would assume that when things were going pretty well, there was any kind of incentive to bring petroleum under the ambit of GST. Well, there was opposition from states even then. It's also become a question of autonomy, of states not wanting to let go further of their powers to tax and something as lucrative as, fuel. So do you think that 6 months down the line, things can change? Are you as optimistic as Mani is this evening?
No, I'm not. I mean, I was about to tell Mani that Mani is being unduly optimistic again. Look, I think the three products, petroleum products, alcohol and tobacco, right? These are the three products which are high revenue generator rather for states. Tobacco in some form has come under GST, although not fully, but alcohol is out and so is petroleum. I think petroleum, there are two concerns, right? One is that, okay, if it comes under GST, then the autonomy to some extent is lost. Although I have a different view from Mr. Sharma when he says that it would be at 28%. If at all it comes, I think it will be much higher. It will not be 28%. The second concern is on the credits, that can the credit be misused, right? And when the revenue collections have not stabilized, and the states are also one very important aspect, right, which Finance Minister said that compensation will not continue most likely beyond June 22. The period will continue only to compensate for the past period for servicing the loan. If that is the case, there's all the more reason for the states to keep this taxing, right? So I don't think it'll happen in a hurry. I think it will take few years, not few months. However, aviation turbine fuel, I think there is a good chance, to my mind, that it should be included because of lesser revenue impact. And also, under the previous regime, before GST came in, excise duty paid on ATF was allowed to be used as an offset by, let's say, against commercial freight, service tax paid on commercial freight by airlines, etc. Right? So it was allowed earlier. It is not allowed now anymore. And I think, therefore, there is a reason for us to be optimistic on the ATF front, maybe natural gas as well. But passenger fuels, which is petrol and diesel, I think we are far, far away from that as of
now. Mr. Sharma, I asked you the question earlier, by when do you think they will be allowed? Let me put this in a different way. Assuming that there is no great incentive for state governments or central government to give up on their taxes that they are getting, about 5 lakh crore rupees in the last fiscal from petrol and diesel alone, what then would be the mechanism to force them to even think about it? In this case, it was on the agenda because of something the Kerala High Court said.
Well, I feel 4 years down the line, things are getting more challenging, more difficult. I would tend to agree with Pratik rather than Mani. Mani seems to be optimistic. I don't see a foreseeable future. You use the word foreseeable future. I don't think in foreseeable future, petroleum products, petrol, diesel to come under the GST. There's a very strong case for natural gas as number one because at the highest policy making level, there's repeatedly being said about the gas-based economy. So we need to promote gas consumption. The gas producers need to be compensated. And as it is, the revenue loss, if the gas comes under the GST, to my mind would be 12 to 15,000 crores. Perhaps Pratik or Mani may correct me on these numbers. ATF numbers are also not high. So that coming under GST, these 5 products, petrol, diesel, crude oil, ATF and natural gas, I would say natural gas would get first priority. And that should come very soon. I know at a very serious discussions have happened on this issue. ATF also may come soon. in that time frame which money says, but petrol, diesel, no. In foreseeable future, I don't think that can happen unless center and states, they are flushed with funds, they can afford to forego some of these taxes. Please, one more aspect I'd like to bring on the table: the ease of collection. This is the easiest for the center and states to collect the taxes. There's no revenue leakage. These petroleum companies, they collect and deposit in the government treasury. So that is the ease of collection, no revenue loss. That is another reason that it will not be an easy decision for center as well as states to agree to forego their revenue on taxes, huge taxes they levy on petrol and diesel. States levy, that VAT. Center keeps increasing the cess. And every time crude prices went down, cess went on increasing, special cess. But when crude oil prices went up, they couldn't afford to, give that relaxation to the consumer. And that's why we have seen that the product prices have gone to all-time high. So I'm only keeping my fingers crossed, and I have all sympathies with the policymakers. It's not an easy thing for them to decide, so not likely to happen in near future.
Okay, so let's put a pin on it. The way the GST Council has, unlikely to happen in the future. One can only hope that our policy makers and our elected representatives feel the pain of people who continue to reel under these prices and really have absolutely no choice. But Mani, I want to also discuss with you the extension, so to speak, of compensation cess till 2026 to make up for the losses that have been borne. How is that going to play out for companies? How is that going to play out eventually for consumers?
Okay, so when the compensation cess is getting extended, there again, we have to remember that there is a downside and there is a small upside. Now, the downside is the fact that most of the businesses which are subjected to the cess, so for instance, automobiles, which is a very big category, which is subjected to the cess, they had done their entire planning on the basis that it's a 5-year tax that they are subjected to. And this was the basis of all the decisions that they took on investments, on costing, on pricing, everything. Now, for them to know now that because the collections were impacted by the pandemic and because the constitutional burden of the center compensating the states for revenue losses at a rate which was 14% year on year could not be met due to the pandemic, and therefore the period is getting extended, they will really struggle because it will have an impact on their pricing, their profitability, and everything else. The small upside that I see is at least this is being informed in September 21 in terms of what is going to happen from July 2022. So it gives people that amount of window to do their planning in terms of new launches, new models, how they are going to cost it, what features they are going to add, etc. Now, overall, when you look at the compensation cess issue, look, it is something on which there are obviously no easy solutions. So there is a mandate that the center has taken upon itself to underwrite the revenue losses of the states. Now, when this underwriting contract was agreed into 4.5 years back, at that point of time, no one expected the pandemic. No one expected something like, a force majeure or an act of God. So that was not caveated out at that point of time. Since it was not excluded, the center is constitutionally bound to compensate the states. Since there were no caveats agreed, no one could have visualized, the magnitude of the pandemic. Now, keeping that in mind, what is the best that can happen? I was very happy to see the finance minister stating so in the press conference, although I haven't seen anything in the press release that, just came out 10 minutes ago, where she was very categorical in saying that the objective of continuing with the cess is only to defray the principal and the interest. It's not to extend the cess per se. meaning that if we did not have the pandemic, if there was no deficit in the cess collection, in that case, possibly this cess would have ended in June 22. But since that has not happened, it is going to be increased. There was also mentioned that it is going to be extended till March 2026. At some point of time, I'm sure they will be sharing details in terms of how that computation is being done. What is the extent of the deficit? In fact, I believe someone asked that also, but possibly that detail will come a little later in terms of the magnitude of the deficit, what is the interest applicable on that, and how that is going to be recovered over the next few years.
Pratik, another important point, and of course I want your comment on this extension and what it means, but another important comment that the finance minister made was when she talked about the revenue neutral rate actually being at about 11% instead of the 15% that was envisaged when the GST came into existence. What do you think the implications of that eventually are, when we know very well that centre and states are really strapped for cash right now?
Yes, so I think she did also articulate the possible reason, right? Because a lot of products which were at 28% earlier was brought down to 18%. In other cases, also rates were reduced. I think in most of the mature economies, the GST rate is in this range, right? The average GST rate, which is 10, 11%, even lower in many countries. There is a merit in keeping the rate, or revenue neutral rate, at this level, to my mind, 11%, 12%, because if you want to expand the tax base, and one of the reasons why GST has led to tax base expansion from 60 odd lakh, 66 lakh to 1.3 crores of registered businesses, is because the rates were moderate, right? So I think this group of ministers should look at this from that perspective, that increasing the tax rate is not necessarily the way to increase the tax collection. In fact, in many cases, the ratio is completely inverse. There have been case studies that, you increase the tax rate and the tax collection has gone down. Therefore, I think this is fine. What they should perhaps do is look at the larger tax rationalization, merging the rates of 5, 12, 18, and 28 into a three-tier structure, and try and sort of expand the tax base. There is a GOM which has been, of course, which they'll also look at the tax leakages. Look at how tax administration can be tightened and tax evasion can be stopped, rather than looking at ways to increase the tax rate. So I think revenue neutral rate getting reduced is a good news to my mind.
Absolutely. So will there be any kind of relief for people as far as it comes to petrol and diesel? Unlikely for now, perhaps not in the foreseeable future. As our panel of experts has said, there could be at least the beginnings of this in 6 months of now when we talk about things like ATF coming under the ambit of GST. But it is something for them to mull over, because look at the conversation so far. When you ask states if they will reduce VAT, they say tell the centre to reduce excise. When you ask central government, they say, well, the states should work with us and we should bring it under the ambit of GST. But no one really wants to. So while this ping pong is going on, the common man continues to suffer, and that really should be the biggest problem of all. Thank you to all of you for joining us on the first big discussion this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.